My name is Lucas Calder, and I grew up in a stretch of America where highways were long and patience was short, and where boys like me learned early that being useful was the closest thing to being loved by the time I turned 29. My family had a habit of treating me not like their son, but more like a walking bank account with a heartbeat. I became the yes machine, the quiet fixer, the one who apologized whenever the card declined, even though it was always their swipe, never mine. I was working long hours in a tech job. Nobody in my family even tried to understand, because why understand something when you can simply benefit from it? They called it computer stuff, and that was enough as long as the money arrived exactly when they wanted it. The day of that cursed picnic arrived on a Saturday that already felt too heavy. I parked my old car near the edge of the park and spotted my brother unloading a cooler so fancy it could have had its own mortgage. He set it beside a woven picnic basket and a patterned blanket arranged like a magazine lay out, and his girl and just stood there posing like sunlight existed for her convenience. My mom waved at me with the energy someone uses to swat away a stray leaf. My dad gave the nod. He always gave the nod that meant I see you, but I also see right through you. And honestly, I am more interested in the chicken skewers. I walked toward them holding a plastic grocery bag from the discount store, because that was all I could grab after 70-hour work weeks. Inside the bag, off-brand chips and 2 cans of soda. Nothing curated, nothing aesthetic, nothing that would earn admiration from people who never admired anything I did anyway. The rest of them were already there. My cousin with nails so decorative they probably cost half my rent. My aunt who could turn my name into an insult without raising her voice. The air smelled like sunscreen and forced cheer, like a family trying too hard to look whole while quietly falling apart. The jokes started almost immediately about my single life, about my clothes, about how I never smile enough. The usual ritual: they poke, I pretend it does not sting. Everyone pretends the world is still spinning just right. I checked my phone once, a message from Mia, the girl I had been seeing. She asked if she needed to fake an emergency call. I smiled and told her not to tempt me. She joked that families like mine always sharpen their words on the person who bleeds the quietest. She was right, and I knew it. Then my brother stood up, lifted his glass, and called for attention, like we were all guests at his royal brunch. Everyone silenced themselves like they were trained. Then he looked right at me and said, "Here is to the one who always shows up broke, discouraged, and still trying so hard to matter." Laughter rolled across the table and into my chest like a blunt knife. And right then something inside me shifted in a way I could not reverse. That was the moment I decided to stop being their wall. They just didn't know it yet. I walked out of the house that morning carrying a weight in my chest that felt older than me, like something passed down from generations of people who learned to pretend everything was fine, even when the walls were cracking around them, and the ground was shifting under their feet, and the sky felt heavy enough to fold a person in half. The air outside was sharp and cool, and the horizon over our small Midwestern town stretched wide like a promise that someone forgot to keep. I was 15 then, and the world was beginning to feel too tight around me, like a shirt, 2 sizes too small, pulled over shoulders that kept growing without warning. The road to school was the same every day, long, straight, familiar, with empty fields on both sides, where last year's corn stalks stood broken and brown, and the wind carried the scent of dry earth and things that had been left behind. It was the kind of place where people waved even when they barely knew you, because that was expected, and expectation carried more weight than truth ever did. I walked slowly, letting my steps fall into the rhythm of the morning, because movement was easier than stillness, and thinking was harder than anything else. My mind kept replaying the moment in the kitchen the night before, the low tremble in my mom's voice, the way she looked past me instead of at me, like seeing me clearly would unravel everything she had worked to hold together. She told me she was leaving for a while, said she needed space, said she felt like the walls were closing in around her, said it was my fault, even though it felt exactly like it was. My dad sat in silence at the table, his coffee gone cold, his hands wrapped around the mug like he could squeeze answers out of the ceramic. He said we would be fine, but he said it in the way people say things when they don't believe a single word coming out of their own mouths. So I walked and tried not to think, but the thoughts came anyway, thick, heavy, stubborn. I wondered where my mom was, and if she had slept, and if she felt even a fraction of the ache that had settled into my ribs like a second heartbeat. I wondered if my dad was still sitting at the table staring at the door, waiting for someone who might not come back. School looked the same as always: faded bricks, long hallways, lockers that clanged shut with metallic finality, voices echoing off walls that never cared enough to listen. I blended in like I always did, the quiet kid, the one who kept his head down and his thoughts locked away, because speaking them aloud felt like stepping onto a frozen lake. You never knew which word would crack the ice. My friends said hey in the casual, "We are all fine" way of kids who assumed everyone lived the same life they did. Laughter in their voices, noise in their steps. I nodded and pretended my insides were not knotted tight. In English class, the teacher read from a book about a boy who felt invisible, and the whole time I wondered if the author had ever walked through a morning like mine, or if invisibility was something he imagined because it sounded poetic. I stared out the window at the gray sky, at the bare branches, at the quiet. I felt something shift inside me, small, subtle, like the beginning of a storm you can sense long before you see it, like maybe everything was about to change again. When the final bell rang, I breathed in and realized the world outside felt different, or maybe I was different. Maybe something had begun to crack open. But I was not ready for what I found waiting for me when I stepped out those school doors, not even close, because the moment I saw who was standing by the gate, I knew my day was about to break wide open in ways I could not imagine. The person waiting by the gate stood with a kind of stillness that did not belong in a place filled with noise and backpacks and kids trying to outrun their own shadows. The sun had dipped behind a thick layer of clouds, turning the afternoon light into something dim and gray, and the figure by the gate looked like a darker shade of that same sky. It took me a moment to realize who it was, and when I did, my chest tightened in a way that felt both familiar and new at the same time. It was my older brother Caleb, the one who moved out 2 years ago without looking back, the one who packed his car and left for the West Coast because he said he needed freedom, needed room, needed anything that was not our house with its quiet battles and its louder silences. He never visited, he rarely called. He was like a ghost that had chosen to stay alive somewhere else. But now he was here, leaning against the metal gate, hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket, head tilted like he was listening to something nobody else could hear. For a moment, I wondered if I was imagining him, if my mind had cracked under the weight of everything and conjured him like some kind of wish. I did not know. I still had, but then he lifted his gaze and our eyes met, and the world narrowed into a single point between us. I walked toward him slowly, cautiously, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt or bite. He pushed himself off the gate and studied me with eyes that looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that did not belong to someone barely in their 20s. He said my name in a voice that carried the softness of memory and the hardness of someone who had learned too many lessons. The painful way hearing him say it felt like something inside me shifted into place and out of place at the same time. I asked him what he was doing here, but the words came out thin, almost swallowed by the wind. He said he came home because he heard about Mom. He said he got a message. He said he drove all night. He said he could not explain why, but something in him told him he had to be here now. His voice trembled just enough for me to notice, but not enough for him to admit it. We stood there in the hum of the afternoon, while students poured past us, laughing, shouting, living in a world that felt separate from mine. Caleb looked around like he was seeing our town again for the first time in years, and something about his expression made me feel both safer and more uneasy, like he knew something I did not. He asked how Dad was holding up, and I almost laughed because holding up was not something my father did. He endured everything until it carved lines into his face and into the air around him. I told Caleb Dad was pretending everything was fine the way he always did, and Caleb nodded with that sad half smile of someone who had expected the answer long before asking it. He said he wanted to talk. He said we should walk home together. I did not argue. Part of me wanted to tell him everything. Part of me wanted to ask him why he had come. Part of me wanted to run. But all of me followed him. The road home felt different with him beside me, like the past was walking next to me, carrying memories I was not ready to unpack. I waited for him to explain more, waited for him to say why he really came back, because the reason he gave felt too simple, too thin, too easy. And when he finally opened his mouth and spoke again, the words he said made the air around us shift in a way that felt almost Dangerous because Caleb did not come home just for Mom. He came home because of something far darker, something he said was already coming for us. The wind picked up as we walked, the kind that carries dust and secrets and pieces of conversations left hanging in the air, and I kept staring at Caleb, waiting for him to look at me, waiting for him to explain what he meant, but he stayed quiet for a long stretch of road. The sky overhead had shifted to a dull blue-gray that made everything around us feel muted, the houses, the fields, the cracked sidewalks, even the sound of our shoes scraping against the pavement felt softer, like the world was leaning in to hear what he would say next. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped into a lower, steadier tone, the kind he used when he was trying to protect me. When we were younger, he said he had gotten a call from someone the night before, someone he never wanted to hear from again, someone who should not have my mom's number, someone who should not know anything about our family. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, but I kept walking. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes on the road, like the words he was releasing were fragile or dangerous. Or both, he said. The caller told him our mom was planning to leave for good, not just for space, not just for air, not just until she felt normal again. He said she was running from something, not from us, but from a person, someone she knew a long time ago, before she met Dad, before she had kids, before she tried to build a life that looked safe from the outside, but had cracks running through its foundation. I wanted to ask more, but the words stuck like they were caught on the edges of everything I feared. My mom had never talked about her life. Before us, she wrapped it up tight, like a box, sealed with tape. No one was allowed to peel. Hearing Caleb say she was running from someone made my mind race in circles, trying to imagine who that person could be, and what they wanted. Caleb said the caller warned him that if Mom left town again, she would not be leaving alone, not by choice, and if she stayed, she might be putting us in danger. He said he did not know whether the caller was lying or not, but something in his gut told him it was real. He said that was why he came home, because he felt like something was coming, something big, something heavy, something that had already been set in motion long before we even knew there was a story behind our story. When we reached the edge of our street, Caleb stopped walking and looked at our house. The lights were off, the driveway was empty. The place felt hollow, like the wind had blown straight through it and taken all the warmth with it. I felt my throat tighten. As we stood there, I could almost hear the quiet inside the walls, and it sounded wrong, like the house was holding its breath. Caleb placed a hand on my shoulder, and the pressure of it grounded me, but also made me more afraid. He said he needed to tell Dad everything. He said hiding the truth would only make it worse. He said whatever was happening was already closer than we thought. I nodded, but my chest felt like it was filled with something thick and slow and impossible to swallow. We walked up the driveway together, and Caleb pushed open the front door. The living room was empty, silent, cold. Something was off, very off, and then we noticed the thing that made both of us stop breathing for a second. The thing sitting on the table, left there for us, waiting, because what we found on that table was a message, and it told us we were already too late. The message on the table was not written on paper, which somehow made it worse. It was carved into a thin piece of wood, like someone wanted their words to feel permanent, sharp, etched into the grain so deeply. It looked almost painful. The room felt colder as I stepped closer, the quiet stretching wide around us like a warning. And for a moment I could hear nothing except the uneven sound of my own breathing. Caleb moved beside me slowly, cautiously, like he expected the message to burst into flames or whisper something living. But it just sat there, silent and heavy and wrong. The piece of wood was small, no bigger than my hand, but the carved letters looked angry, uneven, deep enough that tiny splinters curled around the edges. Come find her. Before I do. There were no names, no explanation, nothing. But those 6 words, carved with the kind of pressure that came only from a hand trembling with rage or desperation. My stomach twisted as I read it again, because something about the message felt personal, not just to Mom, but to us, to our whole family, like whoever carved it knew exactly how to strike where it hurt the most. Caleb exhaled slowly, the sound tight and controlled, like he was holding himself together with threads. He picked up the wood and turned it over, but there was nothing on the back, only smooth, untouched surface, like the person wanted us to focus on the message, and nothing else. He said he had seen handwriting like that before carved into doors, fences, even the side of a truck back, when he was living 3 states away. He said, "The person who did that carving always left a mark, always left a warning before taking something they wanted." His voice dropped when he said it, like speaking the memory out loud. Made it more real. I wanted to ask him how he knew this person, but fear thickened around my throat. Instead I asked where Dad was, because the house was too empty, too quiet. And Dad was never gone this time of day. We checked the kitchen, the hallway, the back porch. But every room felt the same, hollow, cold, untouched. Then Caleb found Dad's phone, sitting on the counter screen, dark, lifeless, like it had been abandoned quickly. Dad never went anywhere without his phone, never. A pressure began to build in my chest, like the air was being squeezed out of the house 1 inch at a time. Caleb told me to grab my shoes and my jacket. He said we were not waiting here. He said we needed to find Dad. He said we needed to move now. I followed him out the door, my heart thudding in a rhythm that felt unfamiliar, jagged, too fast. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the world is listening from behind closed windows. The sky had sunk lower, turning the edges of the evening into something bruised and uncertain. We checked the garage empty, we checked the yard empty, we checked the old shed empty. Every step made my pulse louder, until it felt like a drum inside my skull. Caleb stopped suddenly and raised his hand for me to stay still. He was staring at the driveway, at the ground, at something I had not seen before. A thin trail of dirt leading away from the house, like something or someone had been dragged not far, just past the mailbox. And then the trail ended in a set of footprints that did not belong to Dad, too large, too deep, too deliberate. My breath slipped out in a shaky rush as the pieces finally began fitting into a shape I did not want to recognize. And then Caleb said something that made the evening tilt, something that made the air feel like it had teeth. He said he knew whose footprints those were, and whoever they belonged to, they were coming back. The moment Caleb said he recognized footprints, something inside me tightened like a rope, pulling hard around my ribs, and I could feel the cold spreading from my chest down into my arms. The evening air tasted different now, sharper, heavier, like the world had shifted in a way I could not quite name. I kept staring at the marks in the dirt, trying to understand how something so simple, a shape pressed into the ground, could hold so much danger. But Caleb was not looking at the ground anymore. He was scanning the road, the yards, the shadows between the houses, like he expected someone to step out and finish what they started. I asked him whose footprints they were, but he did not answer right away. His jaw tightened the way it always did when he was trying to keep something inside, something he did not want to say, because saying it would make it real. He finally looked at me, and his eyes carried that same haunted edge from earlier when he had talked about the call. He said the footprints belonged to the same man who had called him, the man who carved threats into wood, the man Mom had once known, the man she ran from. My breath caught on the thought that someone from my mom's past, someone she never spoke about, had found us, found our house, found Dad, and left a message carved in wood like a signature. It felt impossible, but the footprints pressed into the dirt told a different story. Caleb said the man was dangerous in ways that did not show on the surface. He said the man was patient, methodical, and liked to play with people before he hurt them. He said the man had a talent for making people disappear without leaving much behind except fear and a mark carved somewhere as a reminder. He said the last time he saw that carving he was living out west, and a neighbor vanished 2 days later. The sun had finally slipped below the edge of the sky, leaving everything soaked in a bluish gray that made shadows stretch long across the street. I could feel the darkness settling around us, not the kind that comes from the night, the other kind, the kind that comes from knowing someone dangerous is near. Caleb told me we needed to follow the footprints while there was still light. He said Dad might not have been taken far. He said waiting would only give the man more time, so we started walking the direction the prints led, and each step felt heavier than the last. The prints reached the edge of the street and turned toward the tree line that bordered the far side of our neighborhood. Those woods had always felt harmless to me when I was younger, a place to race bikes and hunt for old bottles and pretend the world was bigger than it was. But now the shadows between the trees felt alive, like they were watching us. Caleb crouched near the first patch of dirt under the trees and brushed his fingers across the next print. He nodded, still fresh, still deep, still deliberate. We pushed into the woods, the branches whispering above us in a voice that sounded almost human, and every crack of a twig under my shoe made me flinch. The air was cooler here, darker, thicker, like the forest itself was closing in. Caleb kept his voice low, telling me to stay close, telling me not to fall behind, telling me to listen for anything that sounded wrong. Everything already sounded wrong. We followed the trail deeper until the trees opened into a small clearing, and that was when I saw it, the object lying in the middle of the clearing, something that did not belong to the forest, something that made my legs go weak. It was Dad's jacket, the one he wore every day, lying crumpled on the ground like someone had dropped it there on purpose. Caleb moved toward it, fast but careful. I stayed frozen, because if the jacket was here, then Dad was somewhere in these woods, and we were no longer alone. Caleb knelt beside the jacket and lifted it slowly, like he was afraid it might break in his hands, even though it was nothing but fabric and worn edges. And the faint smell of Dad that always clung to it, seeing it there in the middle of the clearing, made something inside me twist hard, like a warning pulled tight. Dad would never take off his jacket, not in the woods, not anywhere, unless someone forced him, or unless he had no choice at all. The trees around us felt too silent, too still, and the air seemed to hold its breath with us as Caleb checked the pockets, hoping for anything, a clue, a note, a sign. But they were empty. The clearing was wide, but it felt small, like the trees had leaned closer, like they were listening for what came next. The wind moved through the branches in long, slow waves, and each shift in the shadows made me step closer to Caleb without even thinking. I did not want to be alone in that moment. Not 1 inch. Caleb stood, and his expression was colder, sharper, like the pieces of a puzzle he had been avoiding in his mind were finally snapping into place. He said the man had been here. He said the man knew exactly what he was doing. He said the jack, it was not a mistake, it was bait. I felt my heartbeat rise in my throat, because bait meant a trap, and a trap meant someone was near, by someone who wanted us to walk right into their hands. The thought made my skin prickle, like the night itself was watching. Caleb motioned for me to stay behind him. He moved carefully around the clearing, scanning the trees, the ground, the air itself. I followed his gaze, and that was when I noticed something I had not seen before. Something pressed into the soft earth near the far edge of the clearing. Not a footprint, a mark, a rough line carved into the dirt, like someone dragged something sharp across it. The same angle, the same pressure, the same style as the carving on the wood left on our kitchen table. This was not just a trail, it was a message, a signature, a promise. Caleb crouched to look at it, and his voice dropped lower when he spoke. He said the man was close, closer than we wanted to believe, maybe even watching us right now from somewhere in the shadows. A cold shiver ran through me, and I glanced at the dark spaces between the trees, expecting at any second to see a shape move or breathe or step forward. But there was nothing, only silence, only the heavy weight of knowing someone had been here minutes ago. Maybe less. Caleb told me we had 2 choices. We could leave the woods and head back to town for help, or we could follow the trail and try to find Dad before the man moved him again. My chest tightened, because both choices felt wrong in different ways. If we left, we might lose time. If we stayed, we might be walking straight toward danger. But the thought of Dad alone somewhere in these woods pushed everything else aside. I told Caleb we had to keep going. He looked at me for a long moment, like he was weighing every risk, every shadow, every sound around us. Then he nodded once, firm, certain, determined. We stepped past the jacket and followed the new trail deeper into the woods. Branches brushed against our shoulders, leaves shifted under our feet. The darkness thickened, like another layer of the forest was waking up. The path sloped downward, and the air grew cooler still, as if we were moving into a different part of the world, a part that did not want us there. And then up ahead, between the trees, I saw a faint flicker of light, orange, unsteady, alive, a fire. A small one hidden behind a curve in the path, and beside that fire, a silhouette. My breath caught in my chest, not because I recognized the figure, but because of the shape of it, the stillness, the posture. Someone was sitting on a fallen log, waiting. Caleb grabbed my arm hard enough to make me stop. His voice was barely more than a whisper, but every word struck like a hammer inside my ribs. He said that was not Dad, and the moment the figure slowly turned its head toward us, I knew he was right.